You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
It's KFI AM 640. We're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app. I have to jump in as former President Trump is now getting ready to come to the stage. We go right now to Milwaukee in the RNC convention as the former president approaches the stage. He's now shaking hands with various members of his family. Congressman Byron Douglas, his son, Donald Trump Jr., JD Vance is in the front row with Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Also see Tiffany Trump.
His defiance against somebody who tried to kill him. You will not take this man down. He has the courage, the strength, and he will be the next president of the United States. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains.
Okay, he seems to be stopping in the first row, and the audience at the RNC is acknowledging his presence. He has not officially approached the stage, and we will continue to monitor when he is going to give official remarks. We know that he's going to formally announce JD Vance, Senator Vance, who is standing right next to him, and also alongside Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He's going to formally announce and acknowledge that Senator Vance is his vice presidential candidate. And we know that Senator Vance will have remarks, and we don't know how long the former president is expected to speak, but we know that he will speak. He's there in his customary red tie, white shirt, and dark blue jacket. He has a prominent bandage over his right ear. His neck seems a bit stiff as far as how he moves. He's not moving naturally and normally when he tries to turn and acknowledge the crowd. But he is, I would say, about in the front row of the delegation, the convention delegation, as he looks on. He's speaking to people around him. We're listening, obviously, to Lee Greenwood, acknowledge the moment and sing his song that he usually uses for the entrance of the president. So we're continuing to monitor that. And if the former president should approach the podium or Senator JD Vance should approach the podium, we will have their remarks to you. And I know that was an abrupt introduction to the show tonight, but that's kind of where we needed to start anyway. And that's where I am going to start. I was speaking with the Fork reporter Neil Saavedra, talking about how I happened upon what happened Saturday. Just doing my normal monitoring of political events. If the president should speak, Joe Biden, I usually tune in just for information's sake, because I may be called upon to give commentary for the BBC or Spectrum News. And on this occasion, on Saturday, I was listening to former President Trump speak via the Newsmax app in the car. So I couldn't see anything which was happening, but I was listening. And if you didn't hear what I was saying to Neil Saavedra, it was early on in the speech, as we all know. Didn't even really get good into it when I heard the pop, pop, pop sound. And I immediately, because we talk about it here on the show, the difference between fireworks and gunshots. And to me, it's immediately signified gunshots. It sounded, it had that cadence, it had that rhythm of gunshots. And I pulled over because the speech obviously immediately stopped. I couldn't see what was going on. I didn't know. I could hear a bit of what the Secret Service was saying, but I didn't see it. And I pulled over because on my phone, I could pull up a television app and then I could see what was going on and get some live, real-time idea of what was happening. And then we know, as they say, the rest is history. But I wanted to start there, talking about history, talking about where 1968 has long been used as the analog for right now. People want to compare this moment to 1968. 1968 was the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. It was the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And people compare that year, even before Saturday, compare it to 2024. Talking about the discord, talking about the rhetoric, talking about the unsettled nature of the United States, the acrimony. There were riots back in 1968. There were protests, anti-Vietnam War protests. America was a very conflicted and a place was full of upheaval. That was 1968. There are a lot of similarities to 2024. And now with the assassination attempt of Donald Trump here in 2024, it seems more and more like it. And that's going to be my starting point. We've heard President Biden talk about the call for unity. We've heard former President Trump, as far as his Truth Social post, calling for unity. Let me just skip to the end. It is not going to be that. It is not going to have unity. We're not going to have unity in this country as far as the rhetoric. We've had ample opportunities to tone down the rhetoric. We have never made any attempt at toning down the rhetoric. And here's what I mean. We can go back to Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who was shot in the head. There was no attempt to tone down the rhetoric after that. We had the congressional softball game shooting. Congressman Steve Scalise was shot and injured. There was no real effort to tone down the rhetoric after that. There was the January 6th. No members of Congress were harmed. No harm came to Vice President Pence, but also no effort was made to tone down the rhetoric. We know what happened when the husband of former Speaker Nancy Pelosi was attacked, Paul Pelosi, hit in the head with a hammer. We saw pretty much what happened on video. And in response, we had some cable news hosts making jokes about it, talking about how it was some sort of gay conspiracy. Put another way, we didn't make any real effort to tone down the rhetoric. And now this. So it's reasonable from where I sit to make the assumption that we're not going to make any real effort to change direction. And maybe, and I want to be very careful about how I say this, maybe it's because we've never had to deal with the full weight of the consequences of our rhetorical actions. Let me give you an example. I mentioned Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. Even though she was shot in the head, thank goodness she survived. Even though Congressman Steve Scalise was shot, I believe, in the hip, he survived. Even though there was plenty of violence on January 6th, and there was an officer who died due to health-related reasons after January 6th, and also Ashley Babbitt was shot and killed, there was not the weight of what could have happened. It did not happen on January 6th. And we know with Paul Pelosi, even though he was hit in the head with a hammer, he survived. The point I'm making is that because of all these incidents not leading to the ultimate consequences, I believe has given us a false sense of security, or it has told us wrongly that we didn't have to change direction. And it might be some of that. It might be all of that. We did not make any real effort to change direction, and here we are. And here's something else I've noticed about America in this moment. And let me back up and say this. If you're just now talking about political rhetoric, if you're just now concerned, if you're just now outraged, if you're just now saying we need to make a change because of what happened on Saturday, it's hard for me to take you seriously. Because a lot has been happening leading up to right now. We didn't get here Friday night. Because each time one of these incidents has taken place, I've said it every single time. I've said it when we had the near misses. I've said it when we've been able to stop someone in the formulation of these incidents. When talking about Governor Gretchen Whitmer and the plot to kidnap her, I said it every single time. We were going down this path. And it only takes one idiot. Those are the words that I use. It only takes one idiot. And on Saturday, we saw one idiot. Congresswoman Gabby Giffords encountered that one idiot. The congressional softball game encountered that one idiot. January 6th, well, there were a bunch of idiots that day. But it only takes one idiot for all of this to go really bad really quickly. So I don't believe that America is actually about the business of toning down the rhetoric. I believe we're more concerned with trying to blame someone. And we only want to blame someone when the person or the party we care about gets hurt. And until we start caring about all Americans, and until we start really caring about violence, until we really start caring about gun violence, you know what happened on Saturday? Gun culture went gun culture, and nobody should be surprised. We have been approaching this moment for quite some time. On Saturday, it happened to be directed at former President Trump. But it's not the only time. It's just the latest time. And there's going to be a next time unless we change our rhetorical direction. It's later with Mo Kelly. We're continuing to monitor the RNC. Former President Trump is now in the convention center, sitting alongside Congressman Byron Donalds and also Senator JD Vance, who we assume that he will introduce later on as his official vice presidential pick. And we will have each or both of their remarks as they come to the podium live.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
We are monitoring the RNC in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And right now on the stage is rapper and influencer. And I think that's a generous read. That's what they have on the Chiron, at least. Amber Rose is speaking before the RNC. And if you don't know who Amber Rose is, that's quite understandable. She is not significant in political circles. She is known in hip hop circles and stripper circles. That's all I can say. That's what she's known for. But she's speaking right now at the RNC, addressing the crowd. The reason I mention that is because we're waiting for either JD Vance, Senator Vance of Ohio, to speak. He has been publicly named as the vice presidential pick for Donald Trump, the second portion of the ticket. We're going to wait for him to speak and or former President Trump to speak. Customarily, you will have the top of the ticket introduce the bottom of the ticket, and then the bottom of the ticket will speak at the convention. So everyone is in the house. The former president is there. Senator Vance is there. We don't know the order of the program in that regard, but if and when either or both speak, we'll bring that to you live. You need not worry about missing it. But let me get back to what I was saying, talking about Saturday, putting it in historical context. There was something else I wanted to say. When I finally got to see some of the video of what transpired Saturday, the assassination attempt, I know that you're no different than me. We have all sorts of questions about why something did happen, why something did not happen, why something was not secured, why something was allowed to happen. How did this person get here? How did this person scale the side of a building with a rifle and no one stop him? Why was there not someone on top of the building, with oversight, overwatch position and having direct line of sight to the former president? How does that happen? Why did it happen? Whose responsibility was it? Was it Secret Service? Was it local law enforcement? Was it something that was handed off by Secret Service? I would say all those are reasonable questions. All those are legitimate questions. All those are legitimate questions which rightfully demand answers. This is my only admonition to you. Don't try to use your imagination and your political worldview to fill in those blanks. Don't say, well, how did this happen? It must be because it was all staged. Or how did this happen? It must have been because that this is all a ruse. Or Joe Biden ordered this. That's just you using your imagination to fill in the blanks. You're going to get a lot of these answers. You may not like the answers, but you will get the answers. We know that President Biden has asked for an independent formal investigation. We know that Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson has called for a congressional investigation. It may not happen immediately, but we know that it is going to happen. And we know that the Secret Service will have to answer for what did and did not transpire on Saturday. And I will tell you, like I told all my friends and family and people who I may interact with on social media, don't say something stupid on social media and get your ass fired. Don't do it. I know that you want to have a hot take. You want to say this. You want to be funny. You want to post the memes and everything. But just know people are watching. This is a very serious moment. it should be a very serious moment. But we are an unserious nation. We are an unserious country. If you think about what has been transpiring the last 6 or 7 years, how we've been responding to it, I mean, the people that we look to for political endorsements, the type of rhetoric that we've been employing, it has been an unserious march through history. Now, there are some serious moments. Saturday was extremely serious. And also, let me say this. I know I'm jumping around, but there are a lot of thoughts that I've had about this moment, not only in America, but what happened on Saturday. I know Republicans and Trump supporters are probably clicking their heels thinking that, oh, the election's in the bag. It's a done deal. We don't have to worry about it. Trump's going to be the next president. And that may be. Everything which has happened in the past few days points in that direction. But I would caution you, and I'm going to use history as a guide and a comparison point. I would not confuse momentum with an outcome. In 2016, Secretary Hillary Clinton was ahead in the polls most of the way, even with the FBI investigation, which was opened by James Comey and then closed and then opened and closed, whatever, right before the election, she was still leading in the polls. And I believe, looking back, most Democrats were complacent. Most Democrats said, there's no way this guy is going to beat Hillary Clinton. And then reality happened. There's some parallels here because this is July. Let me just take you back 3 weeks, just 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, no one could have foreseen what was going to transpire at that presidential debate. Nobody. Absolutely nobody. People were tuning in to see what was going to happen, but no one could predict the flame out of Joe Biden in that way because President Biden had asked for the debate. He basically said, Donald, I want you to meet me on this day in this place, and we're going to rhetorically duke it out on stage for all the world to see. And it didn't go the way that I'm quite sure he wanted it to go. No one predicted that. And then it sent the Democratic Party and the race into a spiral because no one expected it. No one knew how to respond to that. The Democrats didn't know how to respond to it. I think even former President Trump was like, damn, I didn't expect it to be that easy. And he even took a step back and said less and let the Democrats hurt themselves. That was a few weeks ago. Then we move forward and we have what happened this last Saturday with the assassination attempt. And that throws another monkey wrench into what we thought this election was going to be. And if you want, you can even throw in the dismissal of the classified documents case by Judge Aileen Cannon today. These are all unforeseen circumstances, but they're not determinative. And I'll tell you why. And again, I started with talking about 1968. I'm going to use 1968 again as a comparison point. In 1968, if you don't know your history, that was the year in which Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. We're talking about the second Kennedy to be assassinated in a 5-year span. We're talking about an America who was already emotionally on the side of the Kennedys and the Democrats. And when RFK was killed, the Democrats, in a presidential election sense, they were up about 5 to 6 points. When? July of 1968. There's some parallels here. And the reason that they were up is because the feeling, the sentiment, and also, I would say, the sympathy for the Kennedy family. Most people thought it was a foregone conclusion that whoever was going to be the Democratic candidate was going to be the president. It turned out to be then Vice President Hubert Humphrey. And up until maybe October, Humphrey was leading in the polls. If you know how the election turned out, he was trounced. He barely beat segregationist candidate George Wallace, who cleaned up the southern states. All I'm saying is July doesn't determine what happens in November. And if we use what happened in 2016 and a lesson from the Democrats, I believe the Democrats took their feet off the gas. And we know it's been greatly debated about whether Secretary Clinton should have gone to states like Michigan and Wisconsin and possibly did not do enough in those states in the waning days of the campaign. All I'm saying is a lot has happened in the past 2 or 3 weeks, which has fundamentally changed our perception of where this race is and why it is where it is. We don't know what the next week will bring. We couldn't predict Saturday. We couldn't predict the debate. We definitely can't predict next week. We can't predict next month and so forth. If you were to ask me the election today, if we were to go to polls today, most likely Donald Trump wins the election in a landslide. But so would have Hubert Humphrey in 1968 after not one but 2 assassinations, because you had the assassination of Dr. King in April of 68, and you had Robert F. Kennedy, the assassination of him in June of 68. In July, most people thought that Hubert Humphrey would have won the election because Humphrey was running on a platform to further extend the civil rights agenda of John F. Kennedy preceding him, and Robert F. Kennedy would have done had he been the nominee and then elected. The thinking was that there was too much sentimentality on the side of Democrats for Republicans to win, and the Republicans still won in a landslide. If the past is prologue, if anything, you can't be too complacent, Republicans, if you think it's already in the bag. Hillary Clinton thought it was already in the bag. Hubert Humphrey thought it was already in the bag, and it didn't turn out that way. Why? Because something could always change the trajectory of the race in the coming months. It's later with Mo Kelly. We're continuing to monitor the RNC. There are various people who are giving speeches, offering their support for former President Trump, and also Senator JD Vance, who's been picked as the official vice presidential candidate. If either former President Trump or Senator Vance, who is slated to speak tonight, if and when either or both should speak, we'll have their addresses live for you.
Well, it's later with Mo Kelly on KFI AM 640.
Live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app. And the Teamsters President Sean O'Brien is right now speaking at the RNC, addressing former President Trump, who looks on. We are monitoring the events in Milwaukee, and if and when either former President Trump or Senator JD Vance, who was announced today as the vice presidential candidate on the ticket, if either or both should speak, we'll have them live. We're trying to figure out right now if there is a specific slated time for the vice presidential candidate, Senator Vance, when he would speak. Customarily, you would have the top of the ticket introduce the bottom of the ticket. So that's why we're expecting both of them to approach the microphone this evening. We don't know how that's going to go because the schedule of the RNC, I'm quite sure, has been turned upside down because of the events of Saturday and the assassination attempt on the life of former President Trump. So we are following along as you are following along. If you're worried about possibly missing either or both of their speeches, be sure that KFI will have them whenever they are, and they'll bring them to you live. So we are continuing to monitor what is going on in Milwaukee at the RNC. Also, other news which broke today in relation to that, Judge Aileen Cannon in the classified documents case in Florida, she dismissed the case. To make a long story short, saying the appointment of Jack Smith as special counsel was unconstitutional. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just playing one on the radio, so I'm not going to get into the weeds of the legalese. But I can tell you this. This was not unexpected. You can say the timing was fortuitous because it's on the first day of the RNC and literally hours after the assassination attempt. So within a political context, it was perfect timing for Donald Trump. But long view, this is something I would say that you should expect. And has already happened. Jack Smith has filed an appeal. It will go to the 11th Circuit. And if we use the history as a guide, the 11th Circuit will probably be more amenable to Jack Smith than Aileen Cannon. But in the short term, because it has been dismissed and because the appeal could take anywhere from weeks or months, this guarantees that this case would not be heard regardless of whoever the presiding judge would be. I would expect that Jack Smith will also put in a motion to have Cannon removed from the case and have someone else preside over it. All that would take months, and we'd be well into 2025, and the next president, be it Joe Biden or Donald Trump, would have the final say of what happens to any federal investigation. But in terms of what's important to Donald Trump in the short term, it was mission accomplished, where at the minimum, the case would not be heard before the election. And if Donald Trump should be elected as the 47th president, then he could summarily dismantle not only this investigation, but the January 6th investigation in Washington, D.C., in which Judge Tanya Chutkan would preside over. It would have no bearing on any type of appeal in regard to the Trump Corporation case in New York, which is a state case. And obviously there is no federal recourse there. You can't pardon himself. He can't make that case go away. It's going to have to run its course. But there's a question and a motion before the court regarding presidential immunity in that case, whether, even though these were actions which were taking place before he was inaugurated as president, when he was a private citizen, there's a question of whether some evidence was used during the adjudication of the case, which had to do with actions taken while he was president, and whether there should be a mistrial or a retrial granted, or a motion, the verdict being set aside. So all that is going to be adjudicated as well, but there are different considerations which have to be made. But all in all, it was a very positive day for the political prospects of Donald Trump. And a lot of this has to do with optics. The optics and momentum are more times than not felt. They aren't real, but they're felt. You generate momentum by things happening in a row. If you look at the presidential debate, what happened with Joe Biden, you look at the infighting of the Democrats in the days and weeks after that. If you look at, although horrible, the presidential assassination attempt, the imagery which came out of it, the fact that he was scarred but not seriously injured is positive. The imagery which came out of it, the fact that it happened just days before the RNC, and you start the RNC, and you also have the dismissal of the classified documents case, all those things together, it's a good political moment for him in generating momentum. But again, I said this is July. Who knows what happens a week from now, a month from now, 2 months from now. We all know that this election has changed considerably as far as momentum in just 2 weeks, and it could swing in the other direction. And there's also something else which is working to the benefit of Donald Trump in this particular moment. Since there has been this call for unity, and if you didn't know, historically, when one party is having their convention, the other party stands down. The other party is not campaigning actively. They're not out on the campaign trail. They're not showing their customary ads. You're not doing the retail politics. You're not trying to suck up the air out of the room and steal the thunder of the other party during their convention. That's customary. But since there's also been this call for unity and change in rhetoric, the Biden campaign has been forced most likely to not only stop the ads that they were going to run, but they'd have to change their whole ad strategy. They'd have to change their whole messaging platform. They have to change how they're going to approach former President Trump as far as quote unquote attack ads going forward. You can't have the same type of rhetoric. You can't have the same type of verbiage. You can't have the same type of vitriol. You have to approach it very differently. I suspect that President Biden will have ads which will hew more closely to touting his successes, quote unquote, as president, the legislation he got passed, things that he was able to accomplish as president, how he wants to finish the job and do more in terms of the economy in any supposed second administration or second term. Those are what are the things that will be prominently featured in the ads, and it'll be a completely different look, a completely different sound, and completely different strategy because of the events on Saturday. And oh yeah, by the way, the Democrats aren't even unified as far as Joe Biden being their candidate. Now, I know in terms of the party, he is the presumptive nominee. But if you have members of Congress, Democratic members of Congress, both anonymously and publicly saying that they want Joe Biden to step aside, that type of acrimony within the party still has to be addressed. It's still an issue. They have time to address it. But again, I don't know if it's a problem that has a good solution. The Democrats are going to have to choose the best of bad options to maneuver this moment. And it could all change in a moment, as we saw on Saturday. But right now, everything is pointing in the direction of former President Donald Trump. It's Later with Mo Kelly. KFI AM 640 live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app. We're continuing to monitor the RNC in the event that either former President Trump or Senator Vance should come to the microphone and address the convention, and we'll bring that to you live.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
We're continuing to monitor the RNC. Former President Trump is in the House with his first public appearance since the assassination attempt on his life. Right now, they are reintroducing both Senator Vance and President Trump to the RNC crowd to applause. I don't get the sense that either of them will be formally addressing the crowd tonight. They are in what seems to be the front row of the convention VIP attendees, but I don't get the sense that either is preparing for remarks. They are just being acknowledged. We'll continue to follow this, make sure you don't miss anything. But relative to either Donald Trump or JD Vance speaking, it doesn't seem like either will be taking the dais at this point, or at least on this evening. But we'll continue to monitor just in case. You won't miss any of it if they should. But I did want to spend this last segment as we close out the hour talking about the significance of Senator Vance and what he does or does not bring to the ticket, at the risk of overanalysis. JD Vance, he's 39 years old. He, in the Senate, first-term senator, he will be replaced in the Senate at the discretion of the Ohio governor, Republican Ohio governor, Mike DeWine. So he will be able to be replaced in the Senate. So the Republicans do not lose a seat. They're not risking a seat in that regard. But you have JD Vance, who is young enough to be able to, depends on how they utilize him. He's young enough to be able to talk to a younger demographic. He's able to identify possibly with those individuals that I guess Donald Trump may not be able to identify with, or may not have the same type of connection with, just from an age standpoint. And also JD Vance, I would say, is Trumpism 2.0. He understands how Donald Trump works. He understands his message. He can articulate that particular message. As I watch Donald Trump, he's now walking downstairs to the convention floor. He's waving to the crowd, and the RNC has officially wrapped up its first night of the convention. So neither will be speaking tonight, but they are taking this moment to move through the crowd. They may do some interviews, I suspect. He is shaking hands with various members, various convention delegates, saying hello. Obviously, Secret Service is very close to him right about now in a way that they weren't 2 days ago. I think that's noticeable and also notable as they talk about their people in front of him, actually at all sides around him. Senator Vance is not in view at the moment, but I would imagine he's somewhat close by doing the same thing, as they call it, glad handing and shaking hands of people. He's not doing any selfies, but people are taking pictures of him, but not with him. And this is not uncommon as far as political conventions. It is a pep rally. It's a 3-4 day pep rally where you're unifying the party behind the ticket. And now former President Trump has left the venue. They are formally bringing to a close the events of the night. And let me get back to Senator Vance very quickly before we go to break. There are some strategic, I would say, pluses in adding JD Vance. I was talking about how his age would be a plus as far as the different age demographic that he can reach. In electoral politics, it's also good because if you look at the history of the Electoral College, the states Florida and Ohio, at least in the past 30 years, have loomed large. Those are the states that you have to win. You have to win one of them. You want to win both of them, especially you want to win Ohio. And if you have someone from that state, it makes campaigning in it. It makes turning that state, in this case, flipping it for the Republicans, a much easier task. It's less of a heavier lift. If you go back to Al Gore in 2000, and he could not even bring home his home state of Tennessee. And if he would have at least won Tennessee, the Democrats win in 2000, and Al Gore would have been president. And we wouldn't even had the discussion of hanging chads in Florida. So these types of decisions are very important, regardless of whether you think that former President Trump has a big lead in a polling sense or not. You want to make sure that you have the best opportunity to do well in states like Florida and also Ohio. And since Donald Trump now claims Florida as his home state, and you have Senator Vance with Ohio, you can see the strategy coming into play. Again, it's not determinative, but you can see how, at least from a campaign strategy sense, you can see how they're trying to line up certain states where if it's very close on election night, you have a better chance of winning. Florida, which I think is more red than purple, and Ohio, which has been purple in previous presidential elections. It's Later with Mo Kelly. KFI AM 640. We're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.
We're watching everything, so you can watch your sanity.
KFI.
And KOST HD2.
Los Angeles, Orange County.